Welcome back. Good Friday morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I hope you're having a good Friday. It is Friday, November 14th. It is 8 a.m. on the button on the East Coast. The longest government shutdown in history finally over after President Trump signed the short-term funding bill into law on Wednesday night. Federal agencies are now directing employees back to work. Furloughed workers could start seeing back pay by this coming Sunday. Air travel slowly rebounding after the FAA lifted its mandated flight reductions, expected to be fully ramped up by the weekend. More than 2,000 flights were delayed yesterday. Over 1,000 flights were canceled yesterday alone. Joining me now for a Fox Business exclusive is the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for spending the time and for joining us this morning.
Maria, great to be with you as always. The long national nightmare is finally over. We're so grateful that Republicans stood together and faced down the Democrats. The whole thing was foolish and utterly pointless. As you know, Maria, they got nothing out of that political stunt other than imposing all that pain on the people. You had millions of American families go hungry, literally, through the 43 days of this nightmare. You had, travelers stranded in airports. All those flights were canceled and delayed. People had their lives disrupted. And you had troops and federal employees wondering where their next paycheck was going to come from. The Democrats knew all that pain would be exacted on the people, and they did not care, and nothing came out of it for them.
Well, I mean, Hakeem Jeffries says the fight is not over. He's going to continue. What are the next steps for this financial recovery following this shutdown? Do you expect a serious hit to the economy after 43 days of closed?
Yeah, I mean, it did cost us real percentages on the GDP. It cost us probably trillions of dollars when it's all said and done, literally. I mean, it's the longest shutdown in history, as you noted, and there are real consequences for that kind of nonsense. And it's going to take us a while to get back, but we're right back at it. I mean, the Republican Party, all of us said from the very beginning that this was an unnecessary thing. They made the whole cause up, as you know, Maria. The shutdown was never about health care. It was never about any issue. Their counter proposal for our clean continuing resolution back in mid-September was that they wanted to spend an additional $1.5 trillion, which included $200 billion, to return health care to illegal aliens, among other crazy priorities. They knew we weren't going to do that. They were trying to show, this is what it was all about, they were trying to show that they were willing to put up a fight against President Trump. And that you're looking at the two guys on the screen there, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, who are from New York. They are deeply concerned from a personal perspective about the rise of the Marxist left in New York and around the country, and they're afraid they're going to get a challenge in their next re-elect. That is the entire reason why the American people were dragged through all this pain.
Well, that's incredible that they're still pulling out all the stops to keep this fight going. You heard Hakeem Jeffries the other day saying that the fight is not ending. And, of course, you've got $30 billion expiring of the Affordable Care Act subsidies utilized by 22 million Americans. The Senate vote on that is going to be December 5th. But you would not commit to a vote on this in the House. Is that right?
I haven't, and there's a lot of reasons why. First of all, the Unaffordable Care Act has failed the American people. It did exactly the opposite of what they all promised as it would do. The Democrats broke the American health care system. The reason your premiums are skyrocketing is because they have terrible policies, and one of them is subsidizing insurance companies. That's what this COVID-era subsidy was all about. Remember, the Democrat Party created this on their own. They're the ones that put the expiration date on it, December 31 of this year, because they knew it was a boondoggle. There was no way they could justify that being permanent policy. So what we have said is if there was going to be an extension of that, it would need massive reforms. You need some income caps on that. You should not be subsidizing health care for wealthy people. And also, you need all sorts of reforms on it. You need high protections on those things and other innovations. So the Republican Party has known this is going to expire at the end of the year, as everyone in Congress has. We were always preparing to work through that in a deliberative fashion through October, November, December. But ironically, the Democrats, because of their shenanigans, took a lot of the time off the clock on that for us to do it. So we're working on it in earnest. It is the Republican Party that will bring down health care costs, not the Democrats.
Well, let me ask you a little more about some of these legislative vehicles to watch through year end, because we wanted to know about the ACA subsidies, but there's also the annual National Defense Authorization Act. Currently with 3 Senate-passed amendments involving China. We've been talking about China all morning, Mr. Speaker. The Fight China outbound investment restrictions, the Gain China, the AI chip export restrictions, and the Biosecure, which is the government spending, barring government spending on China biotech. What is your priority with regard to the NDAA and China?
Yes, look, China is a #1 concern and priority of all of us in Congress. It's one of the last bipartisan things that we have going. We have a working group, as you know, that's been that works on that all the time, and we see them as a near peer-to-peer adversary now. So you have to take that very seriously. I don't think they're fair actors. I think they steal our intellectual property. All the things you talk about on the show all the time are true, and we've got to be serious about confronting that challenge. And so the National Defense Authorization Act is typically a bipartisan measure. It's 64 years in a row, I think, is the number of times that we've gotten that bill passed, and I'm hoping we can get it over the line, because these are the things we should all agree on. These are not Republican or Democrat priorities. This is American priorities, and we've got to have our colleagues stand together on it.
Well, and yet, for the last 10 years, the attacks from the left on President Trump, all about Russia, 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 didn't your colleagues in Congress miss something huge? While China was dominating the supply chains and while China was eating America's lunch, they were trying to attack their political enemy by yelling Russia and some crazy story about Trump colluding.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one thing that President Trump, one of the many things, he's typically way ahead of the curve. And you remember back in the campaign, 2015, 2016, he was talking about China, 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 and people mocked him for that. He saw the threat coming. He knew that this would be the principal challenge for us in the days ahead, and he started preparing for it then. We have followed suit and been doing the same, and we have a lot more yet to do. China's a serious threat on all sorts of fronts. In the AI race, of course, in terms of our national security, he's done his best to work with Xi as a partner in trade, because it's important for both nations, and to keep all of that sort of at a stalemate. But we have to get in front of this and stay in front of China. We're the world's last great superpower, but they are trying to compete for that mantle, and we cannot take our eye off that ball. Well,
we just spoke with John Molinar about it from the China Select Committee, but I want to get your take on what happens now, Mr. Speaker, because, of course, you all have managed to fund government until the end of January. And once that expires, are you expecting more drama where your colleagues on the left are going to try to shut government down again at the end of January?
Well, I don't put anything past Schumer and Jeffries and the Democrats right now, but we're going to try to take that weapon out of their hand. And what I mean by that is, over these next several intense days, these next couple of months, we'll be working around the clock to make sure we get more of these appropriations bills through the process. As you know, part of the vote Wednesday night was a minibus, a small package of 3 of those appropriations bills that we've now gotten off the table. There's 12 of them in total. So we're working right now for the next package of those to push through the process and get this done in the way it's supposed to be done, by regular order. That's how we operate as good stewards of taxpayer funds. And as you know, Maria, it hasn't worked that way in Washington for a long, long time. Yeah. Since I became Speaker 2 years ago, I've been trying to force that like a boulder up a hill. And this is a big innovation. It seems like a small thing to cheer on, but in Washington, having gotten 3 appropriations bills signed into law, 3 individual approach bills, is a big achievement. We're going to do more of those, and hopefully we can get all that done by that deadline in January.
Well, you've been talking about this for a long time. What would be an appropriate number of appropriations bills, do you think, that would be done by the end of January? I mean, what's practical?
Well, look, the goal is all 12, and I'm doggedly determined to make that happen. Okay. If we fall short and there are 2 or 3 left on the table, then we would do a continuing resolution to finish those, but it wouldn't be anything like the stakes of this long nightmare that we just went through, because remember, all the bills, everything would be funded. Troops and essential services and those kinds of things would already be off the table. So farmers and federal employees, Border Patrol agents, TSA, air traffic control, they wouldn't have to be sitting around stressed out about when their next paycheck's going to come. That would have been taken care of. So there'd be minor details left at the end of the year. That's the goal, Maria, for us to get all that done.
Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, the Senate GOP adding a provision in the government funding package which allows senators to sue if their electronic records were obtained without their knowledge. Look, we've been talking about this Arctic frost investigation for a while. You've told Senate Majority Leader Thune that you strongly disagree with that addition. It has created some division, certainly. Why are you against that addition?
Well, the optics of it are terrible. I don't think you should do it retroactively. We all agree that Arctic frost was a horrific abuse of our judicial system, and it was an overreach, and we've got to bring accountability to those involved in it, and we have to make sure that stuff never happens again. But I think for sitting lawmakers to vote in themselves an ability to go cash in on something like that, to me, was just it was just a really bad look. And I think many of them regret it. I think some of them are coming out now saying that they will help us to repeal that provision. It should never have been dropped into our clean CR. I fought so hard, Maria, to keep the CR clean, totally nonpartisan. That was the whole point of this, and they dropped it in at the last minute. So look, Leader Thune is an extraordinary leader in the Senate. He's a dear friend, trusted leader. I love working with him. And I think some of these things happen in the haste of a last minute filing of a bill, and it just shouldn't have happened. And I think they regret it now. I think we'll fix it.
Well, I think that's a good point that you just made, and that is you tried so hard to make this clean, and you didn't want all this extra stuff. But how do you push back on colleagues that are just trying to take their political enemies down? I mean, I spoke with Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, and he was very upset that as part of Arctic frost, it captured ordinary Wisconsinites who did nothing wrong, wouldn't even think about breaking the law. And in fact, now they're facing criminal charges because they supported President Trump. Here's the senator with me on Sunday. Watch this.
We want to certainly uncover all the coordination between his prosecution, Department of Justice, what was happening in Georgia and also New York. And I know U.S. senators get all upset about the outrageous violation of the separation of powers. There's no doubt about that. I think what I'm most shocked about is the enormous enemies list, the massive partisan dragnet. There were 38 Republicans, 38 normal Wisconsinites, God-fearing, country-loving, law enforcement supporting people that just were involved in politics because they want to save this country. They were on the enemies list. They were targeted. They had civil suits. They had to settle. They incurred legal fees. That's what Democrats are doing. They're literally trying to cripple their political opposition. So this was way beyond just targeting President Trump. This is a massive scandal, orders of magnitude worse than Watergate.
So, Mr. Speaker, he's talking about 38 Wisconsinites who were part of Arctic frost. It's not just about sitting lawmakers,
No, exactly right. I agree with everything my dear friend Ron Johnson said right there, and the senator's right. We got to go after these people. They weaponize the Department of Justice under the Biden administration. I was on the Judiciary Committee before I became Speaker. We were investigating all that. We were trying to raise the alarm to let people know, because the greatest threat about all this is even beyond the personal attacks on innocent citizens who are just engaging in the political process. It is that they undermined the American people's faith in our system of justice itself. Maria, we cannot maintain a constitutional republic like we have if people doubt that the legal system is fair, and that's what's at stake. There's nothing of greater concern than that, and so we've got to work to restore that trust, and one way we do it is by seeking accountability for Jack Smith and the other abuses, everybody who did that.
And the media is part of this. I mean, I was watching as you all were voting the other night. And you were trying to get the government reopened. I mean, everybody on the floor was earnest and trying to just get back to regular order. And I watched a few channels, and all the Democrat liberal media were talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they were so angry that the Democrats were working with Republicans to reopen the government. They weren't hearing about it. They didn't want to report it. House Democrats prevented a quick vote on the legislation requiring the Justice Department to release all of its files on Jeffrey Epstein. Mr. Speaker, Democrats have ramped up their calls for the release of these files. Why didn't they vote as such on Wednesday? And what can you tell us about that added drama that happened on Wednesday as well?
Well, first, the media bias is absolutely unbelievable. The reason we had to have a press conference every single morning of the shutdown is to go out and tell the simple truth and reset it every morning, because the entire mainstream and establishment media was parroting the talking points of Chuck Schumer, which were patently absurd and totally demonstrably untrue. So don't get me started on that. On the Epstein thing, look, we put a UC on the floor, a unanimous consent to just dispense with the discharge petition, just get it passed by everyone. The Democrats objected to it on the floor. I did that. I put that on the floor. They objected to it. If they were really about transparency and honesty, and they had this great urgency about it, they would have voted to let that be done. It has never been about that. It's been about politics. They're trying to attack the president. They're trying to manufacture some sort of hoax that he had something to do with Epstein, and it is absurd. This has been going on way too long. Look, if they cared so much about the victims of Epstein, why didn't any of these Democrats who are howling and screaming, and all the media types, why didn't they go for the files during the 4 years of the Biden administration? The Biden DOJ had every single one of these documents, and they never did a darn thing about it. You never heard any of these people say a word about it. They don't care about that. They care about going after Donald Trump because they have Trump derangement syndrome. It's very real, and it sort of encompasses all of Washington.
But why, Mr. Speaker? I mean, why? I mean, we look around. Before the shutdown, things felt like they were going well. I mean, we now have questions about jobs, and we have questions about getting out of this shutdown and getting back to regular order. And yet it just seems that there's so much hatred on the left and from your colleagues that they just want to create chaos for President Trump's term. Why?
Well, they do, because we have such a remarkable track record of success. I made the point after the big vote Wednesday night. I went to the press gaggle, all the Hill press corps, and I told them, I said, we have a split screen in America. You guys are not covering this, but the first 10 months of this administration in this Congress were the most productive of any in the modern era and arguably in all of history. Look at it on the Republican side, President Trump and our party. We did the biggest tax cuts in U.S. history. We're doing massive regulatory reform. We're cutting fraud, waste, and abuse out of government. We closed the border as we promised. We're solving the crime crisis. We have all these great things going in the economy, infused pro-growth policies in our big, beautiful bill. The president has ended 8 wars around the globe. All that in 9 months, 9.5 months. What have the Democrats done in the same time, Maria? They shut the government down. And they pushed ICE officers around, and they spurred on political violence. I mean, there's a big contrast, a wide chasm between the two parties. This is not your Democrat, your father's Democrat Party. They're Marxists now. They're radicals, and they are so disturbed that we are delivering for the people. They had to do anything they could to try to disrupt it, and the shutdown was their plan. It didn't work. It backfired, and I think now their leaders are going to lose their posts.
I mean, it's even bigger than that, the fact that they're focusing on things that are not important to the American people. I mean, you've been talking about affordability. You've been talking about getting back to regular order. Will you be able to communicate this come 2026 for the midterm elections? Because there is some criticism that the Republicans are not communicating enough of what's most important. The president said that as well. Republicans need to start talking more about affordability, which you have, but are all your colleagues.
Yes, look, we're going to be dialing in on it, obviously, as we get closer to the midterms. I'm very bullish. I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to grow the House majority and keep the majority in the Senate, the House, and allow President Trump 4 years and not just 2, because if we lose the majority, they'll try to impeach him and stop everything. We got to articulate that. The thing is, Maria, we've had so many successes, so many categories of things that we've achieved that there's been a lot to talk about. We need to narrow in, focus in more. It's a great point on affordability. That's a big thing for people, and we've been working on it every day. And by the way, the Working Families Tax Cut, the big, beautiful bill that we got signed into law July 4th, the reason we did it so early in the Congress is because we knew all the major provisions of that become effective after January, and people will feel those positive effects. Wages will be rising. You'll have more job opportunity. You're going to have more investment, more jobs. All those things will happen, and people will feel it before they vote in the fall. So we're anxious for all that to take place.
And Mr. Speaker, I know that there's a legislative push to allow the FAA to tap into the Aviation Trust Fund to fund operations and pay workers in potential future shutdowns, because it was really dangerous there during the shutdown when our air traffic controllers were calling in sick and having to take on second jobs. Where are you on this push to allow the FAA to tap into the trust fund?
Yeah, look, desperate times call for desperate measures, and you have to put first priorities first. We're looking at that. We're also looking at a couple of pieces of legislation that would prevent shutdowns in the future entirely. Just take all the bullets out of their proverbial gun there. But because if Congress can't get its job done and get the appropriations done on the right timetable, it would allow for a little more delay without all the pain that goes along with it. So the government would stay in operation. There's a couple of different versions of legislation on how to do that. We're looking at that closely. I think it's come to that because now you have one political party, the Democrats, who have just demonstrated they are willing to inflict pain on the people, and we cannot allow them to do that in the future. It's too detrimental to the constituents that we all serve. We got to do something about that.
Mr. Speaker, thanks so much for your leadership on all of this. We so appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thanks, Maria. Always great to be with you.
We so appreciate it. Speaker Mike Johnson. Stay with us. We'll be right back.